पॉलिसी बाजार पर 1 करोड़ रुपए का टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस केवल 450 रुपए महीने से शुरू। वाह!
The Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry has a new president. Subhrakant Panda joins us now at a time when there are so many questions on the Indian economy. There is a lot of optimism about where India is headed. But as always, there are some headwinds as well, which we need to be aware of. Congratulations, Mr. Panda. It is a very important responsibility, and I'm sure, going forward, you'd have lots of suggestions. But this interview comes at a time when COVID is back. It appears there is a big concern in India as well. It's certainly a factor in China. It is a factor in Japan as well. Can you foresee the potential economic impact if this variant of COVID becomes a problem in India?
First of all, Vishnu, thank you for your kind words. So, in as much as the news flow out of China coming in the last couple of days, I would say about a rise in number of cases and deaths and whatnot, I would not like to speculate at this point in time. Because that is a country where news flow is somewhat managed and controlled. So what's coming out of there, to what extent is it exaggerated, to what extent is it underreported, I think in the next few days we will have more details. But the government of India is absolutely spot on in being vigilant and immediately raising the awareness levels. And from that point of view, I would say that there is no need to panic, for the simple reason that if you look at it from the Indian population, close to 100% is vaccinated with 2 doses, a significant number with a third precautionary dose. And from that point of view, I would say that we are well prepared. But, more for the Chinese people as well as the world at large, I really hope that this is something which doesn't spiral out of control. Because there is, first of all, of course, the impact on industry in terms of disruptions to supply chains, which the world can hardly afford. But, the human cost of it is what we need to keep in mind. And it is in this context that I would really like to commend, how India has handled COVID. Because we had lockdowns when we knew very little about what the virus was all about. Then we did the world's largest vaccination drive and did it very smoothly and efficiently. And then we had a calibrated reopening of the economy. And, I headed the COVID task force of FICCI at that point in time. And many of the suggestions we made, including a matrix for a graded reopening, was adopted in large parts by the government. Mm-hmm. And as compared to that, in China, you have had a zero COVID policy continuing for a lot longer than anyone thought it was necessary. Leading to social unrest, and now you have all of a sudden have had the restrictions lifted. But I reiterate that I would not like to speculate at this point in time. Let's wait and watch how things pan out. There is definitely no need to panic, but it's important to be vigilant, which is what the government is doing, especially in terms of genome sequencing of positive cases, so that if at all there is a new mutation out there, then sure, we get a heads up as early on as possible.
So too early to look at potential economic outcomes of what is happening in China with regard to India?
That's right. If I think Indian industry is well prepared because cyclical sectors are have deleveraged their balance sheets significantly. If you look at from the banking perspective, banks have raised funds and are in a position to meet credit requirement. Certainly if there are China specific sectors like pharma or others, if there is disruption, that will be felt. But it's too early at this point in time to speculate what that could be. Right. And I would urge that if you're eligible for a booster dose and haven't taken it, do so. Use some common sense regarding hand wash and whatever it is, but let's not panic.
Now, India's GDP growth rate slowed in the last quarter, primarily driven by the manufacturing sector. In fact, the sector's gross value added contracted by about 4.3% year on year. What do you think needs to be done to boost manufacturing? Because it's a sector that has been struggling after losses during the pandemic.
Well, Vishnu, first of all, the manufacturing sector is very, very important for India. Because if you look at it at the moment, agri accounts for about 16 to 17% of GDP, but 45% of jobs, and that's clearly not a situation which is tenable. And while we have a robust services sector which will account for a lot of jobs, but manufacturing certainly has to come into play. And manufacturing itself has also been stuck in the 15 to 17% range for a long time. And that is where I believe this government has a laser sharp focus on attracting investments and global supply chains to India, and looking to take manufacturing up to 25% of GDP, which is very important. So, issues like, or I should say policies like the PLI schemes and equally reforms or measures to enhance the ease of doing business and reduce the cost of doing business have all had an impact.
Sure.
But we also have to keep in mind that while India is the rare bright spot, going ahead, global growth is slowing down. The IMF has forecast nearly halving of global growth from 6% in 2022 to 3.2% in 2023 and below 3% at 2.7% in 2024. So we have to be prepared for some short-term turbulence without losing sight of the fact that over the medium to long term, the India growth story is intact, and it presents a tremendous opportunity that we must all work towards achieving.
Mr. Panda, inflation has been above the RBI's 6% threshold this entire year. Do you think that rising inflation is bringing down demand? Is that something that is a cause of concern?
Look, inflation is a global phenomena, and I go back to the pandemic period, where both the timing and the quantum of stimulus measures provided by India was spot on, because what you have seen elsewhere is that wherever there was an excess of stimulus measures, inflation has been elevated and stubborn to deal with. Now, India too had an inflation fight on its hand, but that was largely to do with imported inflation, thanks to commodity prices, oil in particular. But with commodity prices cooling off and fiscal and monetary policy working in consonance, you have seen inflation cool off and finally come within the RBI's tolerance band, with the last reported number being 5.88%. But as the governor has said, it's too early to declare victory. I think the worst is behind us, but we have to remain alert to factors which can cause inflation to spike simply because of what's happening in the rest of the world. But having said that, I think that the time has now come to go back to prioritizing growth. As I said, one eye on the short term for turbulence, one eye on the long term for India's humongous potential. Equally, one eye on inflation and one eye on supporting growth, which is absolutely essential.
If you're talking about growth, then in the present context, not just around the world, but in India as well, there are clear economic costs associated with inaction as far as dealing with the climate is concerned. In fact, this is the big focus for India in the G20 year going forward. It's a huge focus at the World Economic Forum this year, next month. So, as you as an economist and as a leader of FICCI look at growth, beyond just the statistics, is it possible to perhaps look or give us an idea of the impact of not acting on climate change or climate related factors?
Well, I don't think there is any doubt that we have to keep sustainability front and center. In fact, if you look at what the world needs, it's actually three axes, which is one, you have to prioritize growth. That's important, but you cannot do it at the cost of the environment. So sustainability is very important as well. And finally, you have to look at being competitive to survive in this world. And therefore, all three, growth, which has to be sustainable and competitive, is all relevant. Now, India has been ahead of the pack in terms of the commitments that we have made at COP26, and I think we are probably the only country which has achieved what we have committed.
Yes.
And with renewable energy picking up significantly. That is first of all. But going ahead, there is going to be a transition towards cleaner energy, and I think Indian industry has to both adapt and adopt this wholeheartedly. And it's not just renewable energy, but you have to look at specific sectors like steel, fertilizers, etc., which are which need to then move towards newer technologies like green hydrogen or hydrogen or green ammonia, etc. But I obviously agree with you wholeheartedly that growth cannot be at the cost of the environment. Both are critical.
If you look at some recent analysis, and I'm quoting a Deloitte report, India will require at least $8 trillion of cumulative gross capital formation to grow into what we are targeting, a $5 trillion economy. Are we genuinely on track to be able to do that?
Look, I think there is a lot which has been done in terms of investing significantly to create renewable energy capacity. India's nationally determined contributions, calls for a huge increase in renewable energy capacity by 2030. So a lot is happening in that regard. But we have to also keep in mind that developed economies rather have done their own share of polluting, but are now looking at funding their green energy transition by taxing developing economies, and that is certainly not fair. And I think both the government and industry have to come together and advocate. This is something that the Honorable Finance Minister highlighted in our annual convention, which was held last week, and I fully agree on this front. And not to mention that developed economies have also not lived up to their word in terms of the funding commitments to developing economies to deal with the renewable energy transition. So these are all important issues. But as regards the number that you cited, I have seen that as well. I think a lot has been done, but we again obviously need to focus on it. And these are large numbers, but I believe that it is something that India is living up to its end of the bargain. Others need to as well.
A final question. Ease of doing business is such, it's almost a cliche. We've been hearing it for decades now, ease of doing business. But it is very much a central theme for this government. Again, quoting from the same Deloitte report, which says that there is a need for India to improve an existing negative perception. They've done a survey which finds that more than 50% of business leaders believe that doing business in India is a challenge. So beyond the steps that have been taken, is ease of doing business in India actually essential in terms of attracting the opportunities for us and for the world in our country?
Look, I think ease of doing business is not a cliche. It's something which will facilitate investment and in turn growth and jobs. Mm-hmm. But this government has focused a lot on improving the ease of doing business. Right through the pandemic, there was a huge focus on taking inputs from chambers like ourselves, and we have interacted at various levels. And there's been a lot of work done in terms of repealing, outdated rules and regulations, and the national single window system, which is now in play, is something which is significant because this is something which works very well at the state level, but it was something that we felt was needed to be done at the national level. That was again a FICCI suggestion that the government has acted upon. But going ahead, there are other measures which can be taken, and I believe the government is cognizant of that. For example, we could look largely at self-certification. Right. Now, this is something that happened willy-nilly during the COVID pandemic period, where inspections couldn't take place and companies were given the liberty to self-certify. For example, boiler inspections. There is no reason why we cannot continue with that approach. Of course, keeping in mind that there should be a very, very heavy penalty for anybody who tries to game the system. Right. But ease of doing business is something which I believe is a priority of this government, and they have done very well in terms of enacting, bringing about certain changes. What needs to happen is, I think, there is clarity at the highest levels. But when it trickles down to the ground level, that is where some of the difficulties that you cited are faced by industries. And I believe that is something that will change with the passage of time. It is changing and will, but that's perhaps what that report was referring to.
Let's just focus on one more sector, which when we talk about India and our global story is looked at so closely, it's the tech sector. Now, India has been a wonderful story of successful unicorns. It's been a story of so many unicorns having established themselves as equally. And here is the problem. We've seen a lot of these unicorns, or many unicorns of late, not succeed. In the tech sector itself, which may or may not include unicorns, we are looking at so many layoffs which have taken place of late. Now, this does follow a global trend. We've seen what's happening in many other countries. So, is the India unicorn bubble, has that bubble disappeared, number one? And number two, how concerned are you about tech sector layoffs?
Look, I think tech-led innovation is here to stay, and I think there are many brilliant entrepreneurs out there who have come up with ideas which are disruptive, which have changed how we look at day-to-day lives or how we conduct business. The fintech sector in particular is a humongous success story with UPI, etc. But the period of very low interest rates and a lot of money swishing around is what led to perhaps a lot of exuberance, some of it irrational, and when you now have a situation of rising interest rates and somewhat of a squeeze on funding, that's where you're seeing some of these challenges. But just as the irrational exuberance was uncalled for, I don't think we should start singing the swan song as far as the tech sector is concerned. As I said, tech-led disruption is here to stay,
right.
And there are many brilliant entrepreneurs out there, and the tide will turn. I wouldn't worry. But when you talk about unicorns and a valuation bubble, I think what is important for everyone out there to focus on is creating value. My belief is create value and valuations will follow.
All right, Mr. Panda, thank you very much for speaking to us, taking a look at where we are headed in terms of the economy. Important days ahead. But I think the big takeaway for me is don't panic as far as the economy and COVID and its resurgence is concerned, but we do need to be alert. Let's hope we are. Thanks very much for being with us. Thanks very much indeed.